Wow, 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 wow. What a perfect song for this morning. And for my talk, actually. I love when Spirit gets it, right? There's only one mind. So many of you know that I have a daughter. She's 24, she lives in Seattle, and many of you also know that she was born with medical fragility. She had lots of issues when she was born, and it turns out she was born with an incomplete spine, among other physical limitations. And not having the bottom part of her spine presented several challenges to her mobility. You see, our skeletal system is actually what creates the foundation for us to be able to stand and for us to be able to walk. And without a complete spine that connects to your hips, she has some difficulty because her bones don't hold her up, her muscles hold her up. And so unlike bones, muscles get really tired, right? And she must sit frequently. And so she uses a wheelchair sometimes when there's distances to be covered. Now, as an adult, she's really figured out pretty much how to accommodate this incomplete spine in almost every setting and situation. But when she was little, all that figuring out fell to me and to the other adults around her. She didn't learn to walk until she was 2, and that's just really well beyond the typical walking age. You usually learn to walk like 11 months, 13 months, something like that. So she was 2. She just couldn't seem to find her feet and her balance as she was growing up. So on the flip side, Kelsey was extremely verbal. All right, so her vocabulary was off the charts. She knew exactly how to communicate what she needed or wanted in every situation very clearly and very early. She might have been late to walk, but she was early to talk, okay? And she was articulate. And here's how these 2 elements kind of showed up in my daughter. And they would align around the age of 1 or 2. And I got a picture of Kelsey. Okay, so just so you know who we're talking about. This is about the age she was. I think that was her first birthday. So a little bit older than this is the story that I want to share. So whenever Kelsey wanted to go somewhere or do something, she would be sitting on a blanket on the floor playing with whatever, and suddenly she would just stick her little hand up in the air, and she would simply say, up. Up. And sometimes she'd elaborate and say, Kelsey, up. And Pam and Donna reminded me the other day that actually she would say, up, right? I want to go. But most of the time it's just one simple little word, up. And so what I would do is I would go over and I would reach down, I would take her hand and let her pull herself up and get her balance, and then we would go to whatever it was that she wanted to go to, and I would kind of steady her gait. I'm sure you've done that with children yourselves. So to help her gain mobility as quickly as possible, they fitted her with these little leg braces. Her little legs were so tiny. She had these little leg braces. We actually still have the very first pair she ever had. It's not that big. They're so cute. But at any rate, they helped strengthen her, and she actually used a little purple walker sometimes when she was learning to walk. And I think we would have provided anything that they could have possibly made to help her figure out her mobility. But for months and months and months, her favorite word was up, right? So of course, over time, she did learn to walk, and eventually she actually learned to run and create havoc, actually. She still has leg braces, and she no longer has a walker, and she no longer calls out up when she wants to move from point A to point B, at least not about walking, right? So as a mother, I don't know that I'll ever stop getting those up calls. They're just not about walking. Sometimes at airports or maybe shopping malls, I'll find her reaching for my hand to kind of steady her, or when she's in her chair, sometimes I'll hold her hand and we roll along like that. But more often now, however, what she's asking for up about are things like problems that she needs to solve, or friendship stuff, or maybe a recipe or something like that. But I know I still call my mom too. I'm thankful I still have my mom to, when I have an up need, I can call her. And that's what we do as living adults. We go over, we take a hand, and we lift, because that's what love does. Love lifts. Love lifts us up. So I think there's a spiritual lesson in all of this for us this morning, in this idea of up. See, what I know is that there is a great power available to us. Just like there was a power available to Kelsey when we look up. And that's my talk title today. First, look up. So let's break this down, okay? So when we raise our vision from the blanket that we're sitting on to the power that's available in the room, in that situation, we are halfway to moving off our blanket. Just by realizing there's a power in the room, we begin to move toward our good. We suddenly realize we no longer need to be stuck in the same place. There is a possibility of moving beyond the place where we feel stuck because we remember there's something greater available to us. See, when Kelsey could lift her eyes above her toy, whatever she was bored with, and she could consider that she wanted to go somewhere else or do something different, and she remembered that there was a strong adult around her, there was a power around her, her possibilities began to grow. When she could recognize that longing inside of herself for something more, this hunger inside, that she wanted something else, and began to look for a solution, she could be fed or entertained or fulfilled in a way that was greater than her current situation. And it's the same for us, isn't it? Right? We find ourselves sitting in a spot in our lives and we're wanting more. When we find ourselves feeling stuck and longing for more fulfillment or happiness or joy or love, our greatest possibility for change lies in our remembering that there is a power in the universe and we can use it. When we can realize that we don't have to solve anything by ourselves, that Spirit's always in the room, when we remember that truth, suddenly we don't feel so trapped on our little blanket. So the first step in rising off our blanket or coming out of our trouble or improving our situation in any way, healing our life, is a mental step. It's a mental step. It's first in our minds that we stop gazing down at our problem, feeling helpless, and start to remember God is always at hand. In our minds, we realize the truth that we are a part of a greater source. Michelle talked about that today. We're part of a greater source in all moments. It starts in our minds. And here's the other thing. Kelsey never questioned her worthiness before reaching up, and we shouldn't either.
Very good.
She would get an idea, and her little arm would just shoot up, and her little piercing voice would say, up. But what happens in our minds is we have this idea of changing something in our lives, and we begin to doubt ourselves. We start talking to ourselves, and we say things like, here I am again, right? How many times do I have to find myself in this situation in my lifetime before I get it? I don't deserve another chance. I knew better than to make this choice or get involved in this thing. I don't have the strength to change this. I'm too old to fix this now. Whatever the language is, whatever you're saying, you're basically saying, I'm not worthy for something better. I'm just going to sit on my blanket. Getting past these beliefs is often the biggest and most challenging step we have in rising up. But when we remember who we are, when we remember we are divine expressions of the Most High God, when we remember that the Most High God and the innermost God is the same, always present in our lives, we know that we are fully worthy of raising our eyes and sticking up our little hand and saying, up. So it starts in our minds, and then our healing moves from our minds to our vision. We must look up. Ernest Holmes says, I look into the darkness until I see the light. I listen to the silence until it speaks. I look into the darkness until I see the light. I don't look down, I look up. So what blanket are you sitting on in your life right now? Where do you feel stuck? Because that's what we're going to call the darkness that Ernest Holmes talks about. Let's look there until we see the light. And maybe you're willing to look at it until you see the light, and maybe you don't want to look at it at all. But if you gaze steadily downward, focusing on the problem, or if you gaze backward, trying to figure out how you got here, you will remain stuck right where you are. When you're, wherever you look with your thoughts, will either continue that cycle and keep you where you are, or your thoughts will hold your reality in place. But if you shift where you look, things will change. There's a spiritual concept called repentance. Now, before you go out to the door, let me give you a new definition of that word, okay? Repentance means to turn. It means to change your mind. It means to turn toward the light, to face another direction, to change where you look. So when you repent about your blanket situation, you're actually saying, I am done being here. I am changing my mind about this circumstance, this relationship, this whatever. I am turning toward the light and I'm facing a new direction because I will move in the direction that I look. So I now raise my little hand and I say, up. So I invite you to try looking up for yourself. Just look upward. Physically look up throughout the day. Looking up physiologically brings a sense of peace to your body. And you might say, I don't want peace, Laine, I want change, right? I want results. But the truth is that peace must be found first, and then a new manifestation can occur. So just practice looking up without an agenda. Do it for like 10 minutes a day. Sit and be receptive and just listen and wait in expectation with your eyes up. Let your thoughts come, let them go. Just wait in the looking up. And this is not a new concept. It's an ancient one. Think for a second about the images you have seen in art. Centuries old art, hundreds of years old art, of this idea of looking up for power, for inspiration, for solution. I've actually pulled together a few of them to illustrate what I'm talking about. See these pictures of women, they're looking up. They're facing upward. It's a familiar image. Our souls know this image, right? Something inside us knows that they are facing a new possibility. They are looking up with hope. And once I understood this concept, I'm constantly finding images in art of people looking up. There's something about it that there's a truth for us in that. So whenever we want a healing in our lives, whether it's a physical healing, an emotional healing, a situational healing, we must have a spiritual revelation. We must reveal a new truth for ourselves. Healing doesn't occur any other way. Healing can only occur through a spiritual revelation. And where does such a spiritual revelation come from? It comes from spirit. How do we connect with spirit? By looking up. By looking beyond and above the physical world, above the form and the circumstance, to a higher plane. And I know it gets confusing because we emphasize around here that God's not up there somewhere. God's not up there somewhere. I'm not actually saying to look up in the clouds for the old thing up there. That's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is look up in your perspective to something higher than human possibility for a human solution. Physically looking up with your eyes is symbolic of mentally and emotionally looking up within yourself. So I want to share this big aha. It's a spiritual revelation for me that I've had in the past 6 months or so. And it's a very timely message this weekend because it's Easter. So today in Christianity, everyone around the world is celebrating this concept of immortality in churches everywhere around the world. And I think we should join in that too, but just in a metaphysical kind of way. So last fall, I took a ministerial level course in mysticism. I took it with my original teacher, Reverend Kathy Ann Lewis of CSL Seattle. And it was actually that class that awakened a desire in me to teach this mysticism class that I'm going to be teaching next month. But anyway, it was in that class that I began to explore this concept of looking up. So what she did was she asked us to think of a situation in our lives and begin looking up, physically looking upward. Whenever that situation crossed our mind, she said, I want you to just stop and look up. Just glance up and remember that all solution to anything going on the physical plane comes from spirit, through a spiritual revelation. So look up and wait for that truth to be revealed to you. So Emma Curtis Hopkins points out this idea of being mindful of our field of vision. And she says that she reminds us that this idea is represented in most holy texts around the world and what she calls the charmed books of the world. And both she and Ernest Holmes, Emma Curtis Hopkins was one of his teachers, and they both found this idea of looking for spiritual truth in all religions and all philosophies. And here's what they found on this particular idea. Isaiah 45:22, "Look unto me and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth." And from the sacred Hindu writings of the Upanishads, "Thou canst not behold me with thy two outer eyes. I have given thee an eye divine with which to behold my power." And from the writers of Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, she wrote, "That thou seest, that thou beest." And the philosopher Plato wrote, "The eye of the soul, which is literally buried in an outlandish sloth, is by right science lifted upward." All of these different languages and cultures and religious and philosophical writings are saying the same thing: look up. So as you know, in the fall, we were in the middle of this idea of getting ready to look for this new spiritual home that we now sit in today. So I thought this might be, in my class, I thought this might be a great thing, a situation to begin working with for a spiritual revelation. So I would begin doing this looking up practice. So every day for weeks, I would spend my meditation time looking up. I would think about the funds we needed to raise and the building we were hoping to create, and we needed to find solutions and ideas, and I just sat and I looked up. I knew that if I looked to Spirit, Spirit would give me divine ideas that I could accept and act upon. It would reveal truths to me. I knew that our solutions may appear on the physical level, but their origins were on the spiritual or the mental level. And Emma Curtis Hopkins also points out that there's a free givingness of God to all. And what is available is what she calls dissolving grace. Dissolving grace, grace that dissolves all obstacles and all barriers. But first we must look to God, or the universal love or light, or whatever you want to call the power of life. We must look there. Life gives dissolving grace to us freely if we just turn toward it. So I began looking toward that givingness of God. I began to look up. And we've talked many times in here about the journey that we took to get into this room. But I've never shared with you the inner work that I was doing. At the same time we were forming our committees and hiring our agent and looking at buildings, I was just sitting in the stillness looking up. Right? At the same time we were rushing around and moving things on the physical plane, I was moving things around on a spiritual plane. I was looking up. I was searching for answers from Spirit while we were searching for answers on the internet. I knew that if at the juncture of those two planes, the physical and the spiritual, our solution would exist in that sweet spot where spirit and human comes together. And somewhere along the way, an image struck me. It was the image of the cross. And as I said this weekend, Christians are celebrating Easter, and Friday, they honored the story of the cross. So crosses are everywhere in our culture at this moment, this weekend. And I think everyone in the world has to eventually come to terms with their personal relationship with this whole cross thing, right? It's a ubiquitous symbol. It's everywhere. It means something different to every person. Now, most New Thought people that I know leave Christianity behind, and they really never look back at the cross and its meaning. And I was one of those people. They never have a new thought about the cross, and I hadn't really either until very recently. So in my life, I've had a couple of interesting cross experiences. Well, I'll share a recent one. When we moved down here, we bought our house, and we realized that we live basically at the base of the most ginormous cross I have ever seen. It is colossal. It's huge. There's a Christian retreat facility just right down the road. Actually, Mary was in the car with me yesterday. I'm like, see that cross right there? I'm going to talk about it tomorrow. So we use this ginormous cross as one of our landmarks, and you're getting close when you see the cross. And there's this farm nearby that the farmer has plowed up this mound of dirt in the middle of his field, and he's put 3 crosses up there, right? So it's just everywhere. And another cross experience I have is Kelsey had to take her SAT exams at a private Christian school in Atlanta. And when I went to pick her up and I asked her how it went, she said, "Mom, I was distracted the whole time. There was this 3-dimensional, ginormous Jesus on the cross that was kind of over the table that it was right here." And she just declared, "It was distracting, Mom." She wasn't used to seeing such things in our house, for sure. Kennedy Schultz, who was the founder of the center in Atlanta where I just came from, used to say he was glad that Jesus wasn't a modern political social activist being put to death, because otherwise we would all be wearing little tiny electric chairs around our necks. So anyway, amusing. So when we were in Rome at the Vatican a few years ago, I purchased this beautiful mosaic cross. I'll share it. It's beautiful. It had been blessed by Pope Francis, and it literally beckoned me from across the room. I really didn't understand why. I have never owned a special cross, not a piece of jewelry, nothing. No, it didn't mean anything to me. It just wasn't mine. I just didn't have significance. But this particular one, I thought it was beautiful. And so I bought it, and I think Becky thought I was nuts. She's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know, I just have to have it." But I trusted that someday I would understand why it spoke to me. And maybe now I do. So the cross means different things to different people. Quite frankly, I really hadn't thought much about the cross in my current spiritual path until I started this entire looking up practice. So somewhere along the way, a few months ago, I woke up to this idea of the cross symbolizing this practice of looking for solutions in our lives by looking up. So let me see if I can explain and perhaps offer this to you as you move forward from today, and maybe your relationship with the cross and the symbol of it will change forever. That's what I can only hope. So if the horizontal bar of the cross symbolizes the physical plane, our human experience, and the vertical bar of the cross symbolizes the spiritual plane, then the cross suddenly makes way more sense to me. It's more relevant to me. See, here we are, we're very busy. We're existing on this horizontal level. We're way out here on the ends. We're struggling in various situations in our lives. We have bills to pay and problems to solve and relationships to figure out and jobs to do. We have stuff, right? We're way out here. And we exhaust ourselves scurrying around on the horizontal level of life, fixing things, rearranging things. And the whole time we're doing that, the vertical plane just sits there. It sits there and it waits. Spirit just continues to flow right in the middle of everything. And even though we're far from it way out here, it sits and it waits. We're out on the edges and it's here. So our practice is to wake up and remember that the vertical is there. Our practice is to reposition ourselves toward the middle, toward the divine, toward the God in every moment. It's always there. We're always connected. The vertical line symbolizes that. The vertical line is that promise that God is always in the midst of whatever we've got going on. On the vertical line exists all the love we have ever created, ever craved, ever needed. It's there. On the vertical line is the peace that we know somehow is possible. On the vertical plane, there is harmony and joy, and it just sits there and it waits while we hustle out here. Come to the middle. Come to your center. Come to the silence. Remember who you are and what is available to you. And then when you get to your center, look up the vertical plane. Look up that vertical line and see what God has in store for you. Look up and see the solution you've been searching for. Look up and know that your troubles or your problems are only temporary and horizontal. Your solution exists if you get to the middle and look up. When your relationship is in tatters, look up. When you are absolutely done with your job, look up. When you're tired of the same old, look up. Get to the middle and look up. And then when you've found your center and you're looking at your situation from a higher perspective, I want you to do what little Kelsey did. I want you to stick your hand straight up and speak your word up. Demand the universe to lift you up. Demand Spirit to hold your hand and lead you to another place. Require Spirit to steady you and help you balance as you take your uncertain steps towards something new. Because just as I took that little hand and let Kelsey go to her next experience, so will the divine givingness of God supply you with dissolving grace and make all things new. So as you leave this building today and you see a cross somewhere on your path, and you will, for the rest of your life, let it awaken you. Let it call you to your center. Reclaim the ancient symbol of the cross. Let that symbol pierce the veil of your life and call you to the vertical. Let the love that it symbolizes lift you up. Will you join me in prayer? Here is what I know. What I know is there is a sweet presence in this room that is present in every moment of my life. The vertical line of God is always, always present. And I know right now for myself and for every person in this room, an awakening of that immortal and eternal power that is available to me. I know that no matter what anyone in this room is facing, no matter what the challenge or the boredom or the complacency of the situation is, all we must do is turn within. Leave the blanket of our complacency and look up. And so for right now, on behalf of everyone in this room, I say and I command to Spirit, up, lift us up, and we shall rise. And affirm with me together. And so it is. Thank you.